Hello, Kristin, Larsen, Transformational Health Coaching. I just want to say welcome and thank you for joining me tonight as I talk about letting go, part 2 of 5 of letting go. And tonight I will be talking about perfection and self-judgment. And these two things have been catalysts in my life for change and things that have helped me to look at my life because they've been preventing me from doing some amazing things in my life. And first, I want to set the space that this is non-judging and that we can approach this topic with curiosity instead of judgment, and how ironic. And I just want to recap what we touched on the first session, which was looking at shame and guilt. And I talked about those topics because I believe that shame and guilt are some major things that are associated with some of the things that we want to let go of. And some of those topics I will be discussing in the future here, but I did discuss shame and guilt, and I'm touching on self-judgment and perfection right now. So if we looked at shame and guilt, we looked at creating an awareness for it and acknowledging it and accepting it. And when we're able to do those three things, then essentially we are releasing the shame and guilt that we have around the things that we want to let go of. So when I'm discussing perfection and self-judgment, that would be something that we can begin to create that awareness for and acknowledge it and accept it. And those are always things that I was lacking when they were coming up in my life. And I found those to be very helpful in order to let go of perfection and self-judgment. And there's always times when those tendencies seem to come up again in my life. And just because I've held on to them for so long, even though I've released them, they still come up. But when I'm able to have that awareness and acknowledge them and accept them, then it's so easy for me to just let go of them again before they start accumulating. So when we look at perfection and self-judgment, basically for me, what it meant for me, if I'm perfect, what did that mean for me? It meant that I won't need to judge myself, that I won't be rejected, that I can finally be worthy, and that I'm enough without me being perfect. I'm not enough without me being perfect. And that's what perfection meant to me. But obviously those are very untrue. And what I found was that perfection and self-judgment, they were both intertwined with each other. They both kind of fed off each other. I was trapped in this mental prison, and it would be a voice of criticism instead of a voice of forgiveness and understanding. So I'd always be criticizing myself for things that I was doing, things that I was saying, and of course that's judgment. And when I was doing that, it perpetuated because I was thinking, what are other people thinking of what I'm saying, thinking of what I'm doing? And then I would base my thoughts and my decisions and my actions, I would base them on that, on what people would be thinking and possibly judging me on what I'm not doing perfectly. And I would obviously compare myself to that. So it was definitely a prison mentally that I was living in, and it was definitely not empowering. So that is one thing that when we're able to let go of self-judgment and perfection, we're definitely living in a place from empowerment and freedom. So I guess I want to discuss how I let go of this, because I know that it's a problem. Sorry, not a problem. It's a challenge that a lot of people have, and it's so hard to let go of when we're living in that state for so long. And I guess one of the ways that I found that I was finally able to let go of that was self-compassion, having self-compassion for myself, and just realizing that I don't have to be perfect and that no one is perfect. And once I'm able to do that, I don't need to have that comparison to the thought that I need to live up to those expectations to be worthy and to be enough. And also what I realized that it's all about surrendering to it, and not continuing that that never-ending battle internally that you're never going to win. And my perception of the self-judgments that I thought that other people had of me were actually my own reflection of my own self-judgments that I had of myself. And once I was able to grasp that, it started to make a world of difference for me, to be able to change my beliefs about that. And that's the most difficult thing that you can do, is change those beliefs. But when you're able to have self-compassion for yourself, to be able to forgive yourself, and know that you don't need to be perfect and that no one is, then you start to release those things. And the last topic I discussed was looking at what it is that you want. And why is that important to you? And when I was able to look at what it is that I want, which was to be free from those thoughts and to be my authentic self, then I realized like how important that is for me in my life, because it's depriving me of being myself and having so many things that I want in my life, and to be that free person that I'm entitled to. It's my right to be free and to be my authentic self. And the only person denying me of that is myself. It's no one else. So once we realize what it is that we want, why that's important to us, then we can start to look at, okay, what does that mean? How can I think and feel in order to step into that? Because we know what it's costing us, and we know the state that we're in, this continual self-judgment and perfection that we have on ourselves. So how do I want to think and feel? So looking at that and making the choice to surrender to that. And I'm not saying that it's easy, and it is a process. It's not something that we can do overnight, but it's disrupting those thoughts, those patterns that come up every single day, and knowing that we're creating the reality and we need to change that story. Because the reality that we're creating is the perceived reality that we think that other people have of us. When we have the self-judgment of ourselves, we perceive others as having that judgment as well, which it's only true if we let it be true. And I know that it's a scary thing, and this is what I found, that it was so scary to change those thoughts, because those thoughts bring us stability, and to go from a place that we know that we can have those expectations, it's a scary thing to change those, because then we're going into a place of unknown, and being in that place of unknown, that's always a scary place. But once we're able to embrace that, and of course the topics that I'm going to be discussing, they all intertwine with each other, because that leads into the place of fear. And again, in what I've been talking about, I've talked about comparison as well, and that's another topic I'll be talking about. But everything's all intertwined, and I just want to stick with self-judgment and perfection, and how we can let go of that. And it is a process, and once we have that awareness and acknowledgement and accept it, then we can take the steps forward to begin to let go and substitute for what it is that we want. So I'd like to ask you, what do you find is the most difficult part of letting go of self-judgment and perfection? It might be some of the things that I've already talked about, which, is that false perception that by holding on to these, we always have that mindset that if we're perfect, then we won't need to judge ourselves anymore. We won't be judged by others. We won't be rejected. And that we're not enough without being perfect. And all those things are totally untrue. And we probably know they're untrue, but it's just something that we keep living with. So it's, as I said, it's very difficult, and I understand, but just know that you can come back to the place that you're in anytime. It's just taking a moment to see what it's like without having that constant thought of perfection and self-judgment. Actually, just take a moment right now. Take a deep breath, and I'll do that with you. And step back. We already did that in the first session. And step back and think what that would feel like, and what are your thoughts of not carrying around perfection and self-judgment? What does that look like, and what does that feel like? What would you have to think and feel in order to not carry that around with you anymore? Just imagine how much lighter you feel in your life without holding on to that. And the one thing that I always think of is when you're public speaking, this is something that I struggle with, because if you have perfection and self-judgment, it's something that is detrimental when you're speaking in front of someone, and people, actually, large group of people, and you start worrying about, it's no longer what you're saying, it's your worry is on what you're saying, as opposed to the message that you're delivering and your worthiness for delivering that message. But looking at when someone's speaking and someone is kind of muffling their words, and they're not speaking totally clearly of what they want to say, but they're speaking from their heart and they're speaking with conviction, do you still resonate with them? I find that I really connect with them because they're speaking from their heart, and they're speaking with conviction, and they're speaking to you, and it doesn't matter. So when you're looking at something like that, it's not perfect, and the opening is there for judgment, that they're not perfect, but we don't worry about judging them because of that, because they're being authentic and they're speaking from their heart. So when I think of things like that, it dissolves the perfection and self-judgment, because I know that I'm stepping into being my authentic self, and I'm being open, and I'm being honest with myself, and I'm surrendering. I'm surrendering to that, and I'm giving myself self-compassion. So if you can see how all those things kind of go together in part of the process of making a decision to let go of this, you begin to understand a little bit better. But also, when those come up, it's about changing the thought process and interrupting that. And once we're able to start interrupting it and start creating that new pattern, that new way of thinking and feeling, and accepting that and stepping into that, then that's when real change starts to happen. So I'd love to hear from you. If this resonates with you, just type in the comments perfection or self-judgment, or type in any comments that you have, and I would love to hear them, or send me a message. I'm open to powerful discussions, and maybe even let me know what's the most difficult part of letting go of this. So I'll just end with this and ask you, what has perfection and self-judgment, what has that prevented you from doing in your life? And what is it that you want? So I appreciate any comments or feedback that you have. And as always, I'm always here for support. And just be accepting and have an awareness and acknowledge it, and that it's okay. So wish you a wonderful day and take care.